Uh, Hello and greetings to everyone who is joining us. Welcome to Sausage Link. Yes, it is pronounced Sausage Link. This is a self-advocacy survival guide. We talk about self-advocacy in terms of neurodiversity and how people can, who experience the world, process information, and interact with the world slightly different than the norm, whatever that might be. We talk about it in ways of, this is valid. We can actually live in this world. So I am one of your hosts. I am Jeannie V, and my co-host.
Hi, I am AJ Locascio, and I am the founder and executive director of Umbrella US, which is the uh, creator of Sausage, the Self Advocacy Survival Guide. Um, I am, for those watching, I am a white um, human being, femme presenting. I have black spiky hair with the gray kind of streak in the front, blue and black kind of large glasses. I am fat. I have headphones on with rainbows on the sides and a black shirt with birds on it and lots of tattoos.
Yeah. And I am a transgender woman. I have a short, sort of bob cut that somebody has equated to Kate Mulgrew, which made my fucking morning. I am wearing glasses with a little bit of a purple tint to the metal. I have a brown top that is sleeveless. There is a simulated bone adornment around my neck. And yeah, my background is blurred because, really, quite honestly, my house is a mess because that's how I go about my life. But in all the things that we talk about here on Sausage Links and self advocacy, there is an undergirding philosophy, there's an undergirding understanding that the most important part of all of this is when you are advocating for yourself, you need a healthy understanding of consent. And we hear consent thrown around a lot in the sex positive, kink, BDSM community. But there are aspects of consent that go outside of the bedroom and into every other room of our lives. And many of those rooms that need consent actually exist within our minds, our brains, and our daily living with ourselves. So we're going to be talking about consent. We're going to be talking about how that applies to self-advocacy. And this is going to be a couple of days, most likely. It's going to be today, probably Thursday. We'll touch on it both days. For those of you who are on the podcast, next episode. But consent is just this basic idea of giving permission. At its very core, that is simply all it is, to give permission, whether that is to someone else giving that to us, or us giving that to ourselves. So, AJ, where does consent run into neurodiversity and the experience that we have?
Well, first of all, a lot of times when people think about consent, they think about the other person. They think about outside of ourselves. And really, I would like people to understand that consent is more about us. And you said that consent goes, into all of the different rooms of our lives.
Yeah.
Every aspect of our life is about consent. And it's about how we want to interact, how we want to present, how we want to be seen, how we want to be treated in all of those different areas. And you're right. When people hear consent, they think sex.
Yep.
Consent is so much bigger than that. And really, last time we talked a little bit about self-awareness and how important self-awareness is. And when we're talking about self-advocacy, which I often say is bullshit, um, we are talking about self-awareness, and the reason I say it's bullshit is because we can have self-awareness. We can have all of the things individually as a person, and we can know what our boundaries are and know what that consent is. But if we don't have access to the resources and the things we need outside of that, then the self-advocacy really is bullshit, because we're trying to self-advocate within a vacuum.
Yeah.
And so when we're talking consent today, I want people to understand that this is really about all of those different areas in your life and how you want to be, and how you are going to communicate your wants and your needs, and what resources you need to be able to advocate for those, identifying what's missing
Right.
so that we can, you know, start advocating as a group to
Mm.
get those things in place for every human being.
Yeah.
We know that the most historically and systemically marginalized individuals have less and less access to resources, which means often that they consent is taken from them.
Right.
Right? Consent gets taken from us, where we are not allowed, and we are constantly trying to consent or not consent, and
Mm.
we're not given that opportunity to do so. So, being neurodivergent, back to your question, being neurodivergent um, is one of those communities where people often think that we don't even know how to consent, where we don't know what we want, and that's just not true. Those of us in the community who are non-speaking and who need devices to help us consent, those aren't really there.
Yeah.
Um, and I'll be honest, I have been talking to somebody about how can we create something to help people consent when maybe they are struggling to be able to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
They are non-speaking individual. Um, they are, sometimes we do. I don't know about you. Well, I do. Both of us sometimes get to a point where we can go where we're not talking, where we're
Mm-hmm.
not able to vocalize the things that are important because we are
Yeah.
so overwhelmed with other things.
Absolutely.
And we still need to be able to consent in that time.
Yeah.
Um, in all of the different aspects of our life, one of those places being work,
Mm.
um, where we can often get very, very overwhelmed, um, and need to be able to communicate. I am somebody who I cry when I get angry.
Right.
Um, I shouldn't say that. I cry when I am enraged.
Mm-hmm.
I can get angry. Anger is usually my first emotion anyway. But when I get enraged and I have a lot of emotion and multiple emotions happening at the same time, um, really the only thing I can do there is either act in rage and
Right.
and rah and scream and you know touch things and beat things up and stomp my feet and throw a fit.
AJ
Um,
Smash.
yeah, exactly. And hey, this is why I create characters when we're RPing, where I get to do that because it's a great outlet for me.
Yeah.
Um, it's a great outlet for me to practice
Right.
other ways of communicating. And I know people might hear me say throw a fit and not like that, but that's what I'm doing. Me
Yeah.
personally, that's what I'm doing in that moment. Um, and In order not to do that,
Mm-hmm.
the other option for me is to cry.
Right.
And that's not professional and it's not business-like and all of those things that people say.
Yeah.
So if I had more access to the resources that I need, including having an understanding individual to talk to, who understands that I can cry and still be professional and reasonable and rational and all of those things, and in that moment,
Yeah.
um, that would be really nice. So
Right.
being neurodivergent, we do need um, to we need to pre-think about what we need when we are overwhelmed and
Hmm.
when we can't necessarily speak in the way that we would like to,
Right.
or communicate in a way that we would like to. Um, what resources do we need? And
Yeah.
it's different for each individual and their own specific neurodivergencies.
And you were talking about that, and that need to have to or that that need to be able to express things with all of the different types of emotions and expressions, and also um, having someone that you can express safely with brings us back to the conversation of why women and femme presenting people have so often been deemed irrational because they may process something in a different way. They get angry and they get cry, or they get angry and they begin to cry, or they shut down, or they go into some of those more primal modes of interacting with what they perceive of as a threat. Um, the flip side of that is, as long as a man gets angry and to some degree becomes irrational, that's legitimate.
Yeah,
Man,
that's what it means to be a man, and he's just passionate about this thing.
right.
Yeah,
And so, there is this discrepancy just even in the gender identifications, that if you're on one side, irrationality is linked to emotion. On the other side, the most irrational emotion is linked with rationality. And it's
right,
like, when did we stop, putting these two things together? And having that ability, and that's the things that we talk about on the podcast, and when we do just about anything together, is like, we do this right here, Sausage Links, Indian No, and the other podcast, and it's like, you get to be you.
right,
If you cry, you cry. If you have that, if you have a form um of experience where when you get stressed, you begin to laugh, then laugh. If you fidget, if you have physical stems that you you know, do those. We kind of want to help people avoid self-harm stems, but at the same time, we recognize that stems are stems. And so you're not going to see, you all who are listening to this podcast, you all who are watching it live on the simulcasts, you're not going to see professionals with quotation marks. You're not going to see people who are polished according to some standard of style. You know, we're going to be who we're going to be. I mean, at any point, AJ or I could have a dog in our laps.
right.
At any point, one of us may start just randomly going off on a completely tangential subject, because that's how we deal with the information. We do try to stick to an outline.
I mean, I
Um,
already did that when you asked the first question today. I already, you
yeah.
know,
And one of the ways that we in the neurodivergent community deal with making things personal, applicable, is we share stories. And so
yeah,
you're going to get stories. And sometimes you're going to sit there and you're like, I don't have a fucking clue what that story meant. It's
right,
okay, because we're telling the story to invite you in to understand us.
right, and to process, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oftentimes, our story is us processing what you just said so that we can understand it and then be able to continue the conversation,
Yep.
right? It's exactly the opposite of what, and I know when we're talking to somebody who's ND here, a lot of us understand this, but there are also those of us who are ND who are like, okay, shut up, get to the point. I'm one of those people. It's like, shut up, get to the point. And at the same time, I'm going to go off on a tangent on something that is really important to me.
Yeah.
Um, and what I've had to work really hard to do is realize that the other person is just processing. They're processing out loud this conversation that we're having.
Yeah. And you all may be wondering, what the hell does this have to do with consent, the subject of consent? Well, processing is part of, how we process the information. Whether we're an internal processor and we shut down, we're an external processor and we verbalize, or we're a tactile processor and we are bouncing all over the fucking room and you can't contain us. That is getting us to the place where we can give consent or withhold it.
Right.
This is all part of the process. And I think we have to lay the groundwork to help people understand. You may be listening out there in podcast land or in the simulcast land, and you are wondering, why do I have to sit there and listen to someone when I just want to give them my answer? Well, it's because you've already done the processing. You've already, it's like, yes, here's my answer. And they're like, well, no, you need to think about it. No, you've already thought about it. You've given them the answer. Great. You can give consent at that point. But there are other people who cannot get to that point.
Yep.
They have to have
can I give an example of
Absolutely.
this for folks? When I have meetings with people, in my meeting description that goes out to people, it very specifically says, I like to get right to the point, blah, 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 blah. And it tells people that they can expect to come in. We're going to immediately get to the point unless they specifically tell me that they need time to connect through stories or something in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I give people options on whether they're going to schedule a 30-minute meeting with me or a 60-minute meeting with me.
Yeah.
Because if they need that time, then I want them to be able to, I want them to have that resource to self-advocate and say, I need more time because I take longer to process.
Yeah.
I need to connect with you through stories and through getting to know you. And I need to spend the first 15 minutes of our meeting just talking.
Right.
Before we get down to business. So that is one way that we take that into consideration. And then if I don't have the capacity to do that, this person has let me know. If I don't have the capacity to do that, I will say, you know what? We're going to have to reschedule today, or we're going to have to get right down to business. I know that you need this, but I just don't have the capacity to do that today. And I'm finding that that works really, really well.
Okay.
And that is a way to allow people to consent to what kind of communication we are going to have in our meeting.
Right. And giving that, and again, this is the giving of the permission. This is being intentional about giving the permission. And that is absolutely all giving consent is. It's the intentionality of saying, yeah, you can do this. We talk about it as if it is a complex, overwhelming process of coming to agreement on something, but it's not. It's just the idea of, if you're okay with somebody doing a thing, it's like, yeah, go ahead and do this. That's it. That's what consent is.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you to hold on just for a second because
Okay.
Widget needs something.
Widget is the spokes dog for Umbrella US. Widget is an Italian greyhound and is adorable. He is, he's less than a year old. And he is a fireball. He's just got all kinds of energy in his in his life. Also, just want to let everyone know, if you are curious about Umbrella US, please hop over to umbrellaus.org. You can find out about the organization itself, about some of the things that we're doing. You can also become a part of the work that we're doing. There is a part on the website where you can actually, if you're curious or you have skills that you bring to the discussion of and the inclusion of the ND community, please go over to umbrellaus.org, check that out, fill out the sheet, and there's Widget in the pouch. Look at
Widget
that.
in the pouch.
Look at that face. What an
I think this
adorable
might have been
face.
for me than for him.
Yeah.
I think he was sensing that maybe I needed a little
A little loving.
extra this morning. So
Yeah. Widget is being trained as a service dog and is is AJ's personal monitor for
yeah.
things. And talk about consent. There's a whole area of consent in the realm of service animals and the place that they have. But that's for a discussion of a different day. Um,
You go.
the other aspect of consent is that consent is a collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
It is a process of people working together. It is not stepping into a situation and saying, I demand this. That's not consent.
There's the word right there, demand,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we see this in the community sometimes
Mm-hmm.
where people who are, I, I think that this often happens with people who are just finding their voice.
Yeah.
They've gotten tired of it. They've maybe started working with a counselor. I know I did this,
Mm-hmm.
where we say, no, you are going to listen to me and you are going to give me what I want.
Right.
I'm not taking any shit from you.
Which
And
there is a time and place for that.
there absolutely is a time and place for that. But in the advocacy world, that doesn't work.
Right.
And what that does is it makes it more difficult for other people to advocate.
Yeah.
Because now people on the other side of us are defensive when we start talking.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to think about that. And that there's another energetic barrier
Absolutely.
that we have to deal with is we have to think about how we are advocating. And that's again what I mean when I say consent, we need to look internally. And you and I have had this conversation so many times.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I have this thing that I want to say.
Right.
I want people to hear me say it.
Mm-hmm.
People aren't hearing me say it, even though I'm saying it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And then we have to say, okay, what are the reasons why people aren't hearing me say this?
Yeah.
And often those reasons are because we immediately put the other person on defense, right? We
Yeah.
immediately put them over there. And in doing that, we don't get heard. We don't get what we want.
Right.
So we have broken consent with ourselves
Mm-hmm.
because we're not getting what we want. We're not going to get what we want.
Yeah.
And that's often where we have to work with somebody else. And why I say self advocacy is bullshit, not because I think self advocacy is bad,
Mm-hmm.
but because of that term self and how it is so often looked at as you have to be alone in doing this.
Right.
And I don't believe that. I think that community supported self advocacy is what's important. And this is why you're such a big part of my community because I can come to you and say, "Oh, I'm really frustrated about this," and you can help me set up so that I can have a consensual conversation that's consensual on both sides,
Mm-hmm.
where what I'm saying can be heard and can be acted upon.
Yeah. And that trust and that love that we've developed over time gives us that ability to know that nothing is personalized. Nothing is personal in what is being said. Even when we kind of just bite each other's face because we're intruding upon something. It's like, you need to back off because damn it, you're reading me too hard. But we
That
know,
happens.
yeah, but we also know that in that space that there is safety, and that there is this idea that, yeah, you're a whole person and you get to process this the way you need to process this. And
Yeah.
I've been, I'm in a self-chastisement mode because this is where my advocacy for the trans community has gotten. Because right now it's at the point where the needs of the trans community are so far down the list of importance, but to me it is of prime importance.
Right.
And to get people to hear me, I've gone to that place of, no, I demand you listen to me. And I've lost the ability to communicate. And I'm not going to apologize because it's still too damn important to me. But recognizing the harm that I'm doing to myself. It's not that I'm hurting them. It's like, well, fine, be that way, bitch. We're going on. And they're going to go and continue to do the thing that has disappointed me. The only one who walks out of it disappointed is me. And so walking into a situation and demanding and saying, no, you will do this thing, you don't impact them. You're only making things difficult for yourself.
Mhm.
You're only making it harder for yourself, but also you are making it harder for those who are similar, who come after you.
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm in my own self-chastisement mode about this because I recognize it. It's a cycle for some of us.
Mhm.
We get into that place where we push and we push and we push, forgetting that it's not always their fault.
Right.
That it's how we're approaching it and how we're doing it. And taking that step back, I think, is the next important part of this. Taking that step back and looking at self-awareness. And I think that, that's where we begin to have to, develop that ability for negotiation.
Right. And negotiation is where it's at, right? And
Yeah.
oftentimes the negotiation piece happens before the interaction with that individual person. You know, um, again, this is something that I had to learn.
Right.
And it took quite a while for me to learn when I was going, why aren't these people listening to me? Ah, you know,
Yeah.
and I had to learn. I had to sit back and I had to think, okay, how is this conversation likely to go?
Hmm.
What are the things the other person is going to want from this conversation? And all of that has to happen beforehand.
Right.
And I don't have to do that alone.
Yeah.
I can do that with you. I can do that with Jessica, who's our co-founder, and I
Mhm.
we meet several times a week, and oftentimes that is what Jessica is doing, is helping me frame something that we're going to write in the book. Like, okay, I want to write this, and here's what I'm going to say,
Yeah.
and then Jessica and I will get to laughing because I will take what I want to say, the way I want to say it,
Hmm.
and I'll put it in Goblin Tools,
Yeah.
and I'll ask it um, to judge it. What's the tone? And when it comes
Okay.
back and tells me that the tone isn't what I want, I'll be like, how can I change this to
Yeah.
to say what I want?
Real quick, Goblin Tools is a web-based interface that provides tools to kind of approach things differently. It provides, it provides some of those things that maybe you don't have the abilities developed to do, like breaking a task down.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it does. I've got these ingredients in my refrigerator, and what the hell am I gonna cook? I have no idea. I can't make that decision right now. So I can throw those ingredients in there and it'll go, here's some recipes. And it comes in an app too. You can just put it on your phone and have it as an app. But it has all of these different communication pieces on there, which I love.
Yeah,
So it's got a formalizer, y'all. You want to have a good laugh with your friends? Describe yourself and however, write a little paragraph describing yourself or ask your friend to do it to describe you because often it's easier for somebody else to do it. And then put it in and make it sarcastic.
yeah.
It is hilarious. It is so much fun. But if you're a really sarcastic person naturally, and that's how you naturally kind of communicate, then you can type it in the way that you speak and then ask it to make it more professional
Mm-hmm.
or to I like the unwaffling. If you're
Yes,
somebody who uses a lot of words to get to the point, you can throw that in there and you can unwaffle it and it'll put it in it'll make it more concise, which is
right.
awesome. So it is a great tool and I love it, and y'all will find out that I do think that AI can really, really help us in that consent piece. It
Mm-hmm.
can really help us
Yeah,
say what we want to say.
right. And again, communication and community are at the heart of consent. Okay. You have to be able to communicate what you need in order to get what you need. You have to
Right.
be you have to be moving toward community building in order to have consent be possible. You cannot be antagonist and seek consent. I mean, if anybody was in my live earlier this morning and you watched the people move through my comments, there are so many people who do not give me consent to talk about the things that I know, the things that I can experience, the things that I'm good at. They are not a part of community. They are antagonists. If you want to achieve consent, if you want to be able to get the things that you need for your own well being, you have to be moving toward community. It doesn't mean you have to agree on everything.
Hmm.
And again, we're coming back to this idea of negotiation. What do I need? What does the other person need in order to come to this agreement? And y'all may be on opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of what you need. But if you're willing to move toward community, the needs are met. You are advocating for yourself in that.
Right.
And you are taking care of getting that consent from this person. I need to be heard. I need to be respected in the things that I know, the things that I say, the things where I'm an expert. I need to be heard in those things. To be dismissed is to tell me that I am not worth being in this space. That's just one example.
Yep.
You know, I don't need somebody to tell me, well, damn, that's the best idea I've ever heard, Jeannie. No. What I need someone to say is, that's a great thought. I appreciate you sharing that. And that's enough. And that's consent. And that's opening that door to community.
Yeah. I'm going to build on that. I had this up earlier and I'm going to bring it up again. This what we require,
Mhm.
what everybody requires, neurodivergent or not, right? Because sausage links is, yes, it's self advocacy for neurodivergent folks, but it's for everybody
Yeah,
because neurodiversity includes everybody.
exactly.
What every person needs is the empowerment to make our own decisions
Hmm.
and to be supported in advocating for ourselves within our community. And I think that community has I'm going to kind of I'm going to take what you said a minute ago and I'm going to disagree with you.
That's fine.
Um, Antagonists are part of our community.
They are.
People, they are in our community. Now, maybe this person could be indie, maybe they're not indie. I don't know. I don't care. But this person is coming in and they are saying, you do not have the right to make decisions for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You do not have the right to advocate for this thing that you need or want.
Right.
What community supported self advocacy does is other members of the community who may agree with them, who may have the same values as this person, they come in and say, I hear what you're saying, and I understand that that's not right for you, but this person has the right to speak and ask for what they want, even
Right.
if you don't agree with it. And that's where we need to move. And that's what we have moved so far away from. You know, the I feel like we're moving back toward that.
Mm-hmm.
But the prior administration really created a chasm
Yeah.
between people, and between belief systems.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what we need to do is fill that chasm
Right.
so that we can actually that can be our meeting place, right? We have
Mm-hmm.
to come together. We have to, I don't know, build bridges, I guess, um, so that we can overcome our differences. We can respect each other's differences and we can value each other as human beings who are
Right.
not the same as us. And that's what community supported self advocacy is.
Yeah. And in many places, in many places where we are seeking, you know, consent for, that self advocacy component, it is not as antagonistic as what I experience on my, platform. Um, Many cases, it's not as antagonistic. In many cases, for example, the most obvious is thank you very much for the gift. But the most obvious is someone who is going into the public school system has specific needs to enable their success in a public school system. And there has to be a negotiation with the school system on those individualized learning approaches. There's negotiation there because sometimes it's not always possible to go into a school and say, well, this is what my kid needs. Well, maybe what your kid needs is a total disruption of the process of how the day goes, but there is room for negotiation and that coming together, because what bigger community do we know of than public education? I mean, it is not just a place where we send kids to fill their day, but it is, in fact, about everybody being connected to the informing of, educating of, and the, fulfilling of younger people.
Right. I mean, it's education is a microcosm of the larger society, right? It's an
Yeah.
institution. And unfortunately, when we have this giant chasm that we have right now, that affects education. And we
Mhm.
see that, right? When you when you have a teacher or other adults in the school, somebody who is in a position of authority in the school system, and they are outright saying that your beliefs, your family, the way you care about people, that is not real, it's not good, it's not accepted. And this
Mhm.
is an education system that you spend most of your time. You
Yeah.
cannot feel safe in that
Mm-mm.
space.
No.
You are not consenting to be in that space.
Mm-mm.
And that's why we're having so many of the issues that we're having. And that affects all of us.
Yeah.
And,
Yep. This is
I
the
feel
one
like,
place where one place where trickle down economics works.
yeah,
When one group of people are being told you don't get that, that trickles down to everybody, because it is going, that idea that they are not worth giving them what they need is going to impact everybody
yeah,
in some way.
right. And so in the self-advocacy survival guide, we address this, and
Mhm.
we address why. Why do we need the self-advocacy survival guide? Why do we need this right here, this conversation
Yeah.
that you and I are having right here? Well, it's because we are judging rather than being curious.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to say we, because
Mhm.
I'm not perfect. There are times when I do that. I'll tell
Uh,
you what, I get, if I look at a person and I classify that person as a white, cisgender, heterosexual, wealthy man,
mhm.
I am going to have guards up
Yeah.
because I am going to assume or judge that this person is not going to want to listen to me, that this person is going to possibly harm me.
Mhm.
Um, so I have to remind myself, be curious before you judge. It's okay
Uh,
to be careful and cautious, but don't lose that curiosity. We're talking about this chasm. You know, the problem, anytime you're writing a book, right? That's
mm,
this type of book of self-advocacy survival guide, you're looking at a problem and defining a problem and you're coming up with a solution,
right.
right? The problem is in our world today, people judge.
Hmm. Yeah.
People judge, and that judgment is um is empowered
Hmm.
by the way our society is set up with capitalism and, again, historically and systemically marginalized individuals being considered less than. Um, and that's a judgment instead of
Yeah.
curiosity, instead of somebody going, oh, this person is different from me. I wonder how we can work together to, do good things and to have
Right.
so that each of us can have what we need and what we want. That's the problem. And the solution is community supported self-advocacy.
Right.
That's what the solution is. And so what we do is we posit that curiosity is greater than judgment. And this is Jessica's thing. This is,
Yeah.
Jessica's catchphrase. Again, for those listening, Jessica is the co-founder of Umbrella US. And Jessica's catchphrase is curiosity is greater than judgment. And what we want to do through this podcast, through having these talks, and in the book is to say, how do we navigate the world through that lens
Right.
of curiosity greater than judgment?
Yeah. And I mean, to internalize it, even to because I deal with so many people when I talk about, you know, indie experience,
Hmm.
and there is this reluctance to even begin to consider oneself within that. And the reason is that the association of being indie is somehow being broken, being less than, being different, being, inferior, being incapable. Those are judgment statements.
Yeah.
Those are not those are not fair statements. They are, they are these ideas of this thing can't be possible because it doesn't work for me. And yet, if you're living that experience and you just don't know it, I mean, you're judging it based on something you've already done in your life because you've built up the coping mechanisms to work through that. The moment we move from judgment to curiosity in our own life, the moment we skip over what we've been told about being ADHD or having a stroke or, having been diagnosed with MS or, being autistic spectrum designated. The moment we move past the judgments of that and we get back into the curiosity side of it, it becomes fun. It becomes fun because now you've been empowered to know yourself.
Hmm.
I mean, being diagnosed as as an ADHD individual absolutely was a moment of epiphany. It was like, oh, that explains a few things. And now that I understand that about myself, then I'm beginning to say, now I can approach this thing that I never knew how I could do it in the past in this way because I'm now empowered to do it this way.
Right.
You know, being able to say, you know what, I do have autistic traits. I've not been diagnosed by anyone, not even by myself, but I do have traits consistent with autistic identities. Those things are not being broken. Those things
Right.
are not being inferior. Those things are just an aspect of how I deal with the world.
Right.
And understanding myself, knowing myself that this is how I interact with the world is like, oh, well now I get to do this a lot more. I get to figure this out a lot more and I begin to process things so much easier because I understood that about myself.
Yeah. And the I don't love the I don't love all of positive psychology.
Right?
I don't love when there are people who are not trained in trauma-informed care using positive psychology on folks who really need to be working with somebody who is trauma-informed.
Yeah.
Um, and I say it in that long roundabout way because there are aspects of positive psychology that are great and it really works in some areas. But you also have to be careful. And
Mm-hmm.
if the person is not trauma informed and you are somebody who experienced trauma, you might want to say, you know what, I need a different person.
Yeah.
Um, somebody who can work with me in this way. Again, that's self-advocacy right there.
Absolutely.
And having the option and the choice to make that. And I guess I don't know whether this is a veer off or right exactly on the subject, but
It'll make sense to someone.
right. Self-advocacy. So think about this. A lot of times people think that they don't get to choose their doctor.
Right.
They're like, well, I'm stuck with this doctor. My insurance says this or that or whatever. Mm-mm. There's rarely only one doctor that works with your insurance. And by the way, if there is only that one doctor that works with your insurance and they are doing harm to you, you have the right to fire that doctor to work with the insurance company and and get somebody else. And
Huh?
this is I know,
Here,
I know. I know we will go to this, I promise. This is one of those things that I worked on more with my clients than anything else is navigating the different care systems and what do I do when my insurance company says this is all I get?
right.
Um, well, you have to fight. You have to fight and you can't do it alone.
Right.
Flat out cannot do it alone, right? And I know that's what you were getting ready to say is no, insurance dictates.
No, 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 no. That's not what I was going to say.
Okay.
What I was going to say is that is a very privileged position to take
Yes.
because when I lived in the panhandle of Oklahoma, Your choice was take what was available or increase your inconvenience to go and find someone else.
Absolutely.
So to say that you can push the insurance, you may not have an option that is right there.
You may not have insurance, let's be honest.
Yeah, exactly. That's another privileged position is you
Yep.
don't have insurance. But, if you do have insurance, but you live in an area where you're isolated, where you're cut off, and the best that you have is a county clinic,
Yep.
because there's a huge portion of the community, the communities of the country that they live where there is one clinic that the
Yep.
doctor comes by twice a week.
And we know that rural medical care is lacking.
Yeah. Or if you go to indigenous communities in the reservation system, you may have a single clinic for an entire region of the state that you can access.
That's not necessarily trauma informed and all of that. But
Or,
that's where community supported self-advocacy is
yep,
not happening
yep,
and what we have to work towards.
yeah,
And those of us who do experience privilege, I experience a lot of privilege.
hmm,
Um, it is our responsibility to create the community
yeah,
to support those who don't have it.
yeah. And you can name all these different groups, the veterans, the VA.
Yep.
Um, Here's a system designed so that self-advocacy is understood. You are a veteran with a diagnosed condition, therefore the system is there to enhance your self-advocacy, and all of a sudden the system is now pushing you out.
Yep.
So, it is, we have all of these different systems that are in place. It does take a fight sometimes to get what you need.
Yep. And
And
it takes somebody who knows how to advocate
right.
within that system. I mean,
Yeah.
we saw that with my husband is a disabled veteran,
Right.
and we experienced it side by side. Other people, we had other people exactly at the same time where I said, if you need some support, let me know. And they just wouldn't reach out to me.
Hmm.
And my husband walks out with what he needed
Right.
because I went to every appointment. They even tried to say that I couldn't go to an appointment with
Hmm.
them. And we were like, bullshit.
Yeah.
She is my advocate. She can be here and she's going to be here. Um,
Right.
and that the people who did not have that support, they didn't get what they needed.
Yeah.
Oftentimes they gave up in the middle of the process
Hmm.
and didn't get anything.
Yeah. Yeah. And my own situation, I'm not dealing with military benefits. I'm dealing with private benefits associated with the United Methodist Church. But I mean, one of the greatest slaps in the face by this system was they decided that I was not disabled and therefore I could seek work. And this goes back to the trauma informed decision making
Yep.
process. Because when they said, we've evaluated your skills, your talents, your abilities, your experience, and we believe that the best option for you in coming out of disability is to become a pastor. Not taking into account that it was being a pastor that was the significant form of my trauma to begin with.
Right.
That you have to clarify, you have to make this thing very clear. It's like you haven't heard the story of where I've come through,
Yep.
and you're offering me something that gives me more harm than gives me a way out of processing through that. And if you're in one of those situations, the greatest form of consent or self-advocacy that you can do is say, I need something else. I need someone else to be a part of this, whether that is to convince the group that you have to work with, or to find another person who brings that knowledge and experience to your situation.
Right.
That is self advocacy. That is consent to be able to say, I don't have to do this alone,
Yes.
or I don't have to rely just on this source.
Yeah. Self advocacy was never meant to be done alone.
No. Mm-mm. Self advocacy by yourself is just being a bitch.
I mean, come on.
Self advocacy without community support is the definition of Karen.
I mean, come on. Um, like what you just said, I think is there's this clarity that is lacking.
Mm,
Um, and what we need is to make sure that there's somebody who has clarity
yeah,
so that we can navigate the situation.
right.
And sometimes that person who has clarity is not the person making the decisions or the
Hmm.
person who is self advocating.
Yeah,
They're somebody outside of that. And
right.
we need them because they have clarity, because they have the energetic ability
Hmm.
or the energetic capacity to support in that moment.
Right.
When we need self advocacy the most is usually when we are least able to self advocate.
Yeah.
And that's why community is so important, because we've got to have those people who come in and say, wait a minute, wait a minute. This person is, in whatever situation they're in, but they are still a human being and they have the right to make decisions for themselves.
Yeah.
Let me support them. Let me take some of the energetic load off of them so that they can really focus on making the decision that they want to make.
Yeah.
And, you know, I feel like there's oftentimes a pissing contest, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right? There's a pissing
Yeah.
contest of, you're right, I'm wrong, or you're wrong, I'm right. Um, or sometimes that does turn into, yeah, okay, I'm wrong, right? But
Hmm.
there's this battle that doesn't need to be there. So we need somebody to come in and say, nobody's pissing right now.
Right.
This is not pissing time.
Yeah.
And then be able to say, okay, and this person over here, they have a really full bladder. They're
Hmm.
really, really, really holding. So we have to say, okay, hang on a second. You go to the bathroom.
Right.
Go get rid of that and come back and rejoin this. And I think that is the key.
Yeah.
And so in naming the book The Self-Advocacy Survival Guide, of course I'm like, self-advocacy. I hate that term. I hate the term self-advocacy. I hate the term self-care. It's not the term that I don't like.
Yeah.
It's the assumed definition of the term.
Yeah.
It's the socially constructed definition of the term that I don't like. So
Right.
we, as a community, get to redefine,
Yeah.
bring it back to its original meaning. The original meaning being this is something that is not happening in a vacuum.
Hmm.
It is something that does not happen by ourselves.
Right.
And it is okay. In fact, it's necessary to have help. It's normal to have help.
Yeah. Fuck your bootstraps, y'all.
Yeah.
Bootstraps are good for one thing and one thing only, and that's sticking your
Uh-oh.
fingers in them.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all a bootstrap is. You actually don't use your bootstraps to pull yourself up.
No, that's when you fall on your face.
Right. If you're pulling yourself up, you're not getting your boots on. That's just simple.
Yeah.
You're pushing your foot into your boot. You're just holding the boot stable.
Yep.
That's what that phrase, that's what that image is about. If you've never worn cowboy boots, you don't use the bootstraps to pull the boot up.
Right.
You use the bootstraps to hold it stable, and then you step in.
Right. It's simply a support.
Yep. That is a great place for us to kind of end the content portion and definitely take conversation from the chat, questions you may have on anything that we dealt with. So if there's something anybody has that they want to bring in, and I know that we're doing simulcast on TikTok and LinkedIn and YouTube, so there's a lot of different places that people can speak. So please toss out your questions, toss out your experiences. There was one that I did want to come back to. Becca said, this year my kid was a part of her IDP meeting so she can speak for herself. Kids have the right to speak for their own needs.
Absolutely.
Forget the idea that kids do not know what they need. They are the only ones who know what they need.
Yep.
The idea that they don't know what they need until their brain fully develops when they're 26 years old is the reality that you don't understand science.
Yep.
The idea of the brain development is completely separate from this understanding of self-awareness, self-need, and self-advocacy. Kids know what they need. If you don't believe me, think back to when you had a 1-year-old. Think back to when you had a 6-month-year-old. That form of communication that they had told you what they needed. If you couldn't understand your kids, that was not a kid problem. It was a listening problem. Because your kids would tell you what they needed.
Right.
Which was either food, drink, sleep, poop, or pee.
Right.
They needed attention. Sometimes they just wanted to be cuddled.
Right.
Sometimes they wanted to be played with. Sometimes they
Sometimes they
just
didn't want to be cuddled. Put me down.
exactly. Yeah, sometimes they didn't. If you don't understand that when we are infants, we have the basic community, the basic concept of self-advocacy, then you don't understand how humans communicate. And it continues all the way through childhood.
Right.
The terrible twos and the threatening threes are just kids learning how to explore the world, interact with it, while at the same time developing self-awareness.
Yep.
And so as they interact, as they deal with things, kids do know what they need. And they will
They do.
ask.
And, I'm coming from the education system.
Mhm.
Coming from that leadership team who sat in those meetings, who made decisions. And I always said, doesn't matter how old the kid is, they should be here.
Mhm.
Because if we are not able to communicate these things that we're putting down on paper with that child in a way that they understand,
Yeah.
then it doesn't matter what the paper says.
Yeah.
And what that led to was a lot of insights on how are we going to write this thing?
Mhm.
Because then what you do is you take that and you give it to the other teachers who weren't in the meeting,
Mhm.
right? And you say, you have to do this. So often it doesn't happen. They're told that they have to do it, but it doesn't happen. As an administrator, I'm going, if you don't do that, we can get sued.
Mhm.
That is a civil rights violation.
Yep.
You must do this thing. And if you are not, we are breaking the law.
Yeah.
So we need those kids in there
Mhm.
so that we can formulate the supports that are in place
Right.
so they understand it. And now in the midst of whatever is going on, are able to self-advocate and negotiate with their teacher
Yeah.
or with another person in that school who they feel safe with to say, this is what I need. This is what happened.
Mm-hmm.
This is how I could have done things differently. Because ultimately, that's what we want the kids to be able to do. They
Mm-hmm.
can't do that if they don't understand that first thing and the rights that they have.
Yep.
So we need them in there so that we can use the language. We don't have to always use grown up jargon, specific to the system that we're in.
Right.
We can do it both ways,
Yeah. What
right?
do
We can write that and we can write it the way that the child understands.
Yeah. And my experience in working with youth comes through the church. And I did a lot of work with youth, especially through summer camp programs and in the local church and the empowerment of youth to do, leadership roles, those type of things. But the thing that I always loved to do was whenever I got the opportunity to speak with youth, um, I would tell them, I'm like, go back to your church and just fuck things up, you know? Um, because many churches don't believe in the self-empowerment of youth.
Right.
Many churches maintain the idea that, and I think this is what has grown out and is pervasive in society, is that youth are to be treated like silent fixtures.
Mm-hmm.
And churches doing programming for youth that was successful in 1956 but being implemented in 2015, and kids are like, you don't get it.
Right.
And these adults are like, well, but it's still how we do things.
Yeah.
And kids are like, no, I'm going to go somewhere else. They're going to advocate for themselves by walking.
Yeah.
And that's part of the kicker, is that when we don't treat kids as self-aware independent components who understand what they need, who understand how they want to get that need met, if we just tell them, well, I know what's best for you, then how are we any different than a system that does not listen to us as an adult?
Right.
So, Becca, I'm glad that you got your kiddo in there doing that self-advocacy stuff, getting them used to that, because you're only going to make them more successful down the road, because now they're going
Yep.
to be able to go into other settings, job settings, and relationship settings, and be able to make that advocacy real for themselves. So good job.
And I will add that in the book, one of the contributors is is a self advocate, but also an advocate for um, parents and children with FASD, fetal alcohol um, syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
and they are writing about this,
Yeah.
about how to advocate in the system and what it feels like, and so it's exciting because again, this book has so many things. It's not just a book that we have written, it's a book that the community has written together.
Right. And
Oh,
bringing
it's going to
all
be so
the
much fun talking about all these things on here.
and bringing all of these different perspectives and all of these different experiences, and people who come at this from so many different directions, is
Yeah.
only going to make it applicable to that many more people. So you may look at this down the road and you see this book and it's like, well, it says it's for neurodiverse experiences, neurodivergent experiences, but that's not me. Maybe it's
Right.
not. Maybe it's not you, but you are a part of the community,
Or
because
maybe it is you
maybe
and
it
you
is
just
you.
don't know.
Yeah. But I mean, you look at it and you're like, well, this is not for me, but don't you have to advocate for yourself? Don't you have to know what you need and know how to be able to manage gaining consent to do that? So yeah,
Yeah.
this book's going to be for you.
Or are you a part of the community? You're an
Mhm.
ally who can help somebody else advocate.
Yeah.
And it could be as simple as being at the grocery store
Right.
and there's a person and they need a little bit of support right there in that moment,
Mhm.
right? I mean, I need support every time I go to the grocery store. Every single time I go to the grocery store, I have to speak to somebody and
Yep.
ask them to help me.
Yep.
Now more than ever. Now I can't even climb the things if I need something on the top shelf. I just can't climb it and I have to ask for help.
Right. I'm reading through a book right now that is it's tough. It's tough because it's an antagonistic book, when it comes to my worldview.
Mhm.
But there's a story that's told in one of the early chapters about a a mother who had a small child, and they were trying to board an airplane, and the the representative of the airline told them that they couldn't leave their big bulky stroller, that they had to carry it down instead of having a crew member come and take it down and secure it, that they had to do it. And yet here they are with all of their carry-on bags, their diaper bag, their kid, this big bulky stroller, and they just sat down and they cried.
Mhm.
And it's in that moment that we can choose to be an ally, or we can choose to be self-concerned. Because, you know, for that woman, she needed an advocate. And in this case, that advocate may not have been able to go to the person who represented the airline, but that person could say, "Would you like me to help you with some of your stuff? I'll be glad to carry that down so that you can get settled." That's advocacy.
Yeah.
Okay. She could not communicate her need. Her need was very simple. She needed to get all of her stuff from the top of the gangplank onto the plane. If you've ever flown, you know how easy that is. But in that moment, she was incapable of doing that, as well as incapable of communicating the need.
Right. She was completely overwhelmed in that moment.
Completely. Yes. And the natural inclination of many of us in this country, if someone who is a complete stranger or even someone we know comes up to us and says, "Can I help you do this?" Our immediate response is, "No, I got it myself." When we are living the very contrary to that,
Right.
we are sitting down, crying, not able to verbalize what we need done. But no, I've got it. I can handle this. Honey, you haven't got it. You
Right.
can't handle it. You have reached a point where you've exceeded your ability. You have to give consent to be helped.
Right.
And in that moment, community is formed because a woman walked up and said, "Hey, look, I've kind of been in a similar situation with my kid. I'll be glad to carry the stroller down for you." And another one came along and said, "Hey, let me grab your carry-on bag. I'll follow you. You can go right behind me. I'll lead you whatever the way." And so a couple of people who were mothers stepped in there with this mother, and all of a sudden the job got done. This is all we're talking about, y'all.
Yep.
This is all we're discussing. This is what sausage is about.
Yep.
It's just this idea of recognizing, no, you cannot do it on your own. In fact, you are sitting here unable to go forward, not able to communicate, and saying, "No, I got this."
Mhm.
We want to help you with that.
Right.
if you'll let us. I think we're going to end the conversation there. We're going to pick up on this in the next episode. For those of you who are on TikTok, YouTube, and LinkedIn, that will be on Thursday, 10 o'clock Central Time. You can watch the live simulcast. Of course, you can always send us questions. You can always, hit either one of us up on our different platforms. I'm on TikTok most of the time. AJ's over on LinkedIn. You can also submit questions in the YouTube once you've watched this video. You can always hit us at umbrellaus.org. If you got questions or you have concerns that you would like to possibly get some interaction with, please reach out. Send out that email to info@umbrellaus.org, or just hit me up in one of my lives, or this is about the conversation, so please feel free to connect with us if you would like to know more about this. AJ, thank you very much.
No, thank you.
You betcha. Always lovely.
Literally could not do this without you.
Well, I mean, I couldn't do this without you either, because you do all the hard stuff. I do all the pretty stuff.
Yay! Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
All right, y'all. We will see you later on Sausage Links.